Did God abandon Jesus? We want to thank you for sending in your questions this week. Every week we try to take a few minutes and respond to questions that people have about the Bible, about faith, about the church. And this week our questions comes to us from our email account. I have a question at omahabbc.com. And here's the question. Pastor John, I have a question. I've never understood why, in his final moments on the cross, Jesus said, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" It almost seems to contradict the fact that he was God incarnate if he didn't understand why he was being crucified. First of all, that's a great question. And the implications of this question go right down to the roots of Christianity and the nature of God. But I'm going to try to respond to it as briefly as I can. So first of all, there is a tension. There's a tension between the humanity and the divinity of God, right? We believe that God is fully human and we believe that God is fully divine. And so when there are times when it seems like Jesus doesn't know something or is having to learn something, it sort of disturbs the idea of Jesus as divine. And yet if we think about it, we know that there are things that Jesus has had to learn at different points. We know this. I mean, nobody believes that Jesus was born as a baby knowing how to speak modern English, although we believe that's a thing that God probably knows. No, for Jesus to be human means that Jesus has had to learn things the way that other people learn them. Jesus had to learn the language of his family, probably Aramaic, the same way that other people learn languages. He had to hear the words that his mom was speaking and say them back to her. And we have no problem that Jesus had to learn to speak at some point. And so we see that farther on in Jesus' life too. There are other things that Jesus had to learn, other things that Jesus had to figure out. We see Jesus being tempted in the desert for his ministry to look a certain way, that he was tempted to turn stones into bread and to feed all the people around him. He was tempted to throw himself down from the top of the temple so that he would be rescued miraculously and people would flock around him and follow him because of his miracles. And we see Jesus tempted to take control over all the nations of the earth and for God to accomplish God's purposes that way. But through that temptation, Jesus refined his ideas about what exactly God wanted from him. He learned. He decided. We see Jesus doing this again in the Garden of Gethsemane. He is absolutely distraught, and Jesus is sweating blood, and he is praying, and he is calling out to God, God, let this cup pass from me. If it is possible, if there is any other way to do this, God, any other way, let that be the way. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours, Jesus says. In other words, he doesn't know yet if there is another way. He hopes, he believes that maybe there might be another way. And yet he is still willing to be obedient to God. And so we have Jesus here on the cross crying out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is feeling this experience of being abandoned by God. He felt abandoned. He experienced abandonment. But then again, the real question is, was he? Was he abandoned? And the answer to that, I think, is when we find what exactly Jesus said. When Jesus cries out on the cross, he cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And what's interesting is that's a direct quote from the very beginning of Psalm 22. Let me just read this for you quickly. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. And so the psalm goes on actually to describe some of the things that Jesus is experiencing on the cross. Here he says, all who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. He goes on to say, I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. See what is going on here in Psalm 22 is everything that is happening to Jesus on the cross. He's quoting the beginning of this psalm and wanting the people around him to see what is happening, to recognize what is going on and the meaning that it has. Jesus quotes Psalm 22, and it begins with this cry of abandonment, this feeling of being abandoned by God. My God, why have you forsaken me? But it goes on to describe what Jesus is experiencing. And what I think is really interesting is where it ends. Where it ends. Starting with verse 29, he says, To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow down all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has accomplished it, or he has done it. It goes on to end with this expression of faith and hope. An expression of faith that God can redeem, that God will take even this awful thing and will make something good come out of it, and ends an expression of hope that God will accomplish what God wants to accomplish through this. In our worst, absolute worst times, we experience some of this same sense of abandonment. We're going through this really difficult time, this really painful time, and we want God to fix it and make it better, and we look around and we see no presence of God. We see no experience of the presence of God. We see nothing of God helping us. And we look around and we say, my God, why have you forsaken me? But the meaning of the cross is that the worst thing is never the last thing. The meaning of the cross is that even our worst moments can be redeemed by God. The meaning of the cross is even that in our greatest pain, God is with us and can begin to make this painful experience a part of the good story that God is telling in our lives. And that, I think, is what Jesus meant when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So thanks again for your questions. I appreciate all of you who take the time to send them in. If you have any questions, you can either leave them here in the comments or you can send us an email. I have a question at omahabbc.com, and we'll respond to those as best we can. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.